exclusive.
French President Emmanuel Macron appears exclusively on France 24 and RFI. He'll be talking about people smuggling in Libya, the migrant crisis, his commitment to fighting terrorism in the Sahel, and his vision for Africa, its development and ties with the European Union. Don't miss this exclusive interview on France 24 and France24.com.
Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, at least 3 people are killed as Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta is sworn in for a second term. Police are accused of heavy-handedness in cracking down on opposition protests. Also, in his first major speech in Africa, France's president speaks to students in Burkina Faso, insisting that he's a different kind of leader from the former colonial power. We don't want to tell Africans what to do, says Emmanuel Macron, although some protesters remain sceptical. And Rwanda and Israel's leaders meet in Kenya a week after Israel agrees to pay Kigali to take illegal migrants from them. Preparations are already underway to deport around 10,000 people. But first, in Kenya, at least 3 people, including a 7-year-old boy, were killed on Tuesday in clashes that broke out as President Uhuru Kenyatta was sworn in for a second term. Tens of thousands attended his inauguration, whilst police used live rounds and tear gas to break up protests by supporters of opposition leader Raila Odinga. And the country's faced months of uncertainty after an unprecedented move by the Supreme Court. It cited electoral irregularities in its decision to nullify Kenyatta's first victory back in August. Now, Odinga boycotted last month's rerun and insists that Kenya's inauguration on Tuesday is still illegitimate. Dozens of people were killed during the months of election unrest, and Kenyatta's called for unity and an end to division. Julia Steers joins us now with more. Julia, you were there at the inauguration. Many Kenyans had hoped that it would mark the end of recent political turmoil. Do you think that's likely?
Well, at this point, people are definitely fearful that the events of today just will mark a continuation of what we've seen here over the last few months. But Kenyans on both sides of the political divide are really expressing real feelings of weariness of this electoral period. The last few months have been particularly hard on Kenya's economy, and that's been felt across the board. So talking to people here in Nairobi and beyond, you really do get the sense that people want to move beyond this election period, want to move a lot beyond the political unrest. And President Kenyatta hinted at that in his speech today. He called on people to move forward. He struck chords of unity, as you said. He said the time for politics is over and it is time to move forward and heal as a nation. Now, whether or not that will actually be possible seems unlikely at this point, with Odinga vowing to continue his fight and his supporters continuing to show up to hear him speak, continuing to turn up in the streets when he calls on them to stage acts of civil disobedience and mass resistance. And that is in spite of the fact that the police are continuing to meet them with this heavy-handedness, as you mentioned, that we've seen over the last few months.
So with at least 3 deaths being reported on Tuesday as the opposition tried to hold protests, it's clear that Odinga still won't be backing down. What, though, does he have in terms of options?
Well, in terms of legal means to overturn President Kenyatta as the president, that really ran out last week. The Supreme Court overturned a petition to overturn the second election of President Kenyatta, clearing the way for him to be sworn into office today. And on the diplomatic front, there has been huge pressure, mainly by the U.S. and the U.K., to get Odinga and Kenyatta to come together at the negotiating table to explore options that could include a national dialogue for peace and unity, or possibly an official opposition leader type position in the government. Odinga has been very clear that he is not interested in those kinds of conversations, that he will only sit down with Kenyatta to negotiate a new, fresh election. And he said today that he would hold his own separate swearing swearing-in ceremony on December 12th, which is Kenya's Independence Day, which really has people worried that he will go even further in his resistance movement so as to set up some sort of separate government. And he insisted that this was a coronation today, that it was illegitimate, and that he will himself be sworn in as president on December 12th.
Thanks very much. Julia Steers there for us in Nairobi. Well, France's president, Emmanuel Macron, kicked off his tour of West Africa by trying to reach out to Burkina-based students in Ouagadougou on Tuesday. In a speech at the city's university, the 39-year-old said that he was from a new generation of French leaders, those who were keen on building relationships with the continent rather than telling it what to do. However, despite his promises of a new approach to relations with Africa, clashes broke out between police and young protesters who say that they're sceptical about Paris's sincerity about breaking with the past.
The campus was closed, but Macron gets to get in. Tell me, who does this campus belong to? They closed the campus to students now.
The old habits are coming back. The police are here. Yesterday, the military surrounded us. People are being gassed as if they were rats in holes. It's really deplorable. And for me, Macron is not welcome here in Burkina Faso, and especially not in the university.
We came out in force this morning to show Macron and France that the Burkina they knew in the 60s and the 80s is not the same as today's Burkina. France must understand this once and for all.
Well, in the 2-hour speech to students given by Macron, he chose a more informal venue and style of address for an official visit than is usually seen. While the event was packed out, many of those attending also took the rare chance to grill the president of the former colonial power on what the details of this offer of a new partnership meant. Our Mark Perlman was there and he tells us more. Mark, we heard there from some pretty angry young people ahead of Macron's speech. How did what he had to say go down with those actually attending the event?
Well, it was really a very interesting moment that we witnessed this morning. Obviously, there were some incidents. Clearly, this is a university campus where many students are very politicized. And even within the amphitheater where he delivered his keynote speech on Africa, we could hear some slogans, and clearly the students, and we were sitting amongst them, were clearly agitated. But it must be said that after a lengthy policy-based speech of 1 hour and 45 minutes, it was really interesting and really unprecedented to hear questions and answered, and unfiltered ones, between the students and the French president, where they really attacked France's policy in Libya, in Africa, its economic policies, and questions about colonialism. And the French president really struck back, sometimes quite vehemently. And so this was really a back and forth that's not usual. And you could see the president of Burkina Faso, Roch-Marc Kabore, who was sitting by, and some of the attacks were more aimed at him than actually Emmanuel Macron. So this was really a very, very new moment for the debate. And this is what Emmanuel Macron was here to deliver. He said, I'm not going to talk to the heads of state. I'm not going to talk to parliaments. I'm going to talk to the youth, and this implies a part of improvisation, a part of rowdy exchange. And I think that on the whole, we spoke to a few students afterwards, they were rather pleased that someone, a president, engaged them, that he talked to them. He talked about education, about their goals, about the economy, about politics, about climate, and so on. And they were happy that he did so by listening to them and not only lecturing them.
Thanks very much. Mark Perlman there for us in Ouagadougou. Now, do join us on Wednesday for France 24's exclusive interview with French President Emmanuel Macron. That'll be going out live at 6:30 p.m. Paris time. Excuse me, that'll be 7:30 p.m. here in Paris. Well, Macron will be heading to an EU and African Union summit in Ivory Coast on Wednesday and Thursday, a meeting at which the issue of trafficking and migration will feature heavily. It's an issue that also was central to talks between Rwandan President Paul Kagame and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. They met in Nairobi on Tuesday, a week after Israel agreed to pay Rwanda $5,000 for each illegal migrant the African country accepts from it.
As the number of asylum seekers around the world hits an all-time high, Rwanda says it's ready to take in 30,000 migrants currently in Libya.
Here in Rwanda, we already started discussions with all the relevant institutions. We will have to register migrants, find them a home and a job. This is something new for us, so we're still working on it, but we won't go back on our decision.
Rwanda is also in talks with the Israeli government to take in 10,000 migrants currently in Israel. The Jewish state is home to about 39,000 Africans, mostly from Eritrea and Sudan. Most claim to be refugees, but the Israeli government sees them as economic migrants and has refused to grant them residency permits. Israel's policy now is to try to deport these migrants to a third country using a combination of financial incentives. Rwanda is set to receive $5,000 for each migrant it takes in.
For us as a nation, we don't mind if these people want to come to Rwanda. And the numbers are not that high.
Several organisations, including the Rwandan Red Cross, will be in charge of welcoming these migrants and ensure they have access to basic necessities.
We are ready. We have all the necessary equipment: blankets, mats, soap, mattresses. We have everything.
Rwanda is already home to 80,000 refugees from Burundi and more than 70,000 from DR Congo. Its decision to take in more migrants comes amid growing criticism of its human rights record.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us.